So today we are going to be talking specifically about workforce challenges that our guests are facing in the construction industry and how they are using employee engagement techniques to overcome these challenges and work with these issues. So we hope that you'll leave the session with some helpful tips and advice that you can implement in your own construction companies. So without further ado, let me hand over to our host, Neil Hailwood, who will help you speak with the panel from WorkBuzz and HS2, who also will introduce themselves.
Thanks, Hayley, and look, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us this morning, and thanks particularly to Paul and Lisa for giving up their time to share their insights and experiences with us all. I'm a former Chief People Officer. I now work as a chair, a non-executive, an advisor, a mentor, and investor to a range of different businesses. But one of the things that I remain and am passionate about is actually the extent to which engagement in the workforce has impacts and benefits that come through improved performance and productivity. So that's something that I consult and advise on. And I do some work with WorkBuzz in that context, hence I've been asked to run the session today for you. But it's not about what I do, it's about our guest speakers. So without any further ado, I'll ask them to introduce themselves. So perhaps, Lisa, if you go first, could you just introduce your business to our listeners and then tell them what your role is at HS2 as well?
Yeah, thanks, Neil. Good morning, everybody. I'm Lisa Mobius-Singh. I am the Senior Employee Engagement Manager for HS2. HS2 is Britain's new high-speed rail line, for those of you that don't know, and we're building a rail line from sort of London to Northwest, with rail links that are going to connect from the likes of London, Birmingham, Manchester and Scotland. So it's actually one of the largest infrastructure projects in Europe and the most important economic and social regeneration projects in decades. So I feel very proud to be working on a project like this. We've got about 350 active sites across the Midlands and London. So we're actually supporting about 30,000 jobs, 30,000 jobs. So that's even before we've started even running a train. So a great project to be a part of. And I'm responsible for ensuring HS2 has an effective employee engagement framework that supports our business goals, our vision, which is all aligned to our people strategy and also our operating plan. So the engagement strategy, what we ensure is that it aligns to our business goals and our Engage for Success for key engagement enablers. So again, for those of you that don't know what those are, it's strategic narrative, engaging managers, employee voice and organisational integrity. So in summary, I manage the end-to-end employee voice process for HS2 and anything that really comes along with that, including a very well sort of run values award programme. So that's me, Neil. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Lisa. Very, very sharp and succinct as normal. And Paul, it's now your turn in the spotlight. Tell us about your business. Tell the listeners what you do, and then what's your role in the business.
Yeah, thanks, Neil. So Paul McCreath, Group HR Director for WorkBuzz UK. We're a nationwide UK contractor, particularly in the civil engineering space. We are a Dutch business. We're pretty much standalone in the UK, so I look after HR across the UK businesses. I've been in construction for 25 years from since, so I've seen lots of change in that time. And certainly, I think the engagement in gender in the last, well, probably the last 2 years, certainly the last 5, but even more focused in the last 2 years, has changed beyond all recognition, I think, from where I look back to 25 years ago. So my role is across HR, L&D, the whole people function, and I've certainly seen in the last couple of years with the people challenges that all industries are facing, but our industry in particular, engagement becoming particularly relevant at a board level. And it's something that previously probably wouldn't be quite the same, and we'll go through on the session today about how that's been achieved and how WorkBuzz have helped with that. But I certainly think the business see engagement now as one of the key tools that we have at our disposal to actually help with employee engagement, with retention, performance, and it's certainly come into its own now, I think, as a topic.
Thanks, Paul. Excellent. Well, as Hayley mentioned at the start, I'm going to ask a few questions of the panel to get them to sort of talk about and share their experiences. But I mean, the chances are I won't ask the questions that might be top of your minds, those of you sort of listening in and sharing today's conversation. So if you have questions that you want to ask or put to Paul or Lisa, do feel free to put them on the chat room, and at various points I'll go back to Hayley and we'll call up any of those observations or comments. But perhaps just before we do any of that, let's just start by exploring what the sort of workforce issues you are both seeing at the moment might be. I mean, we've all, as HR professionals or business people, we've been reading a lot, haven't we, post-COVID, about working practices changing, about attitudes to work changing. We've had commentary about the kind of great resignation or quiet quitting, as all sorts of words being used to describe things being different in the workforce. But I'm keen to understand, on behalf of our listeners, what are the workforce issues that you're confronting at present in your businesses, and are some of those proving more important or more significant than others? I mean, Paul, this time, why don't you go first and talk about your organisation, and then we'll come back to HS2, which has size and scale across the whole country, as we've said. But tell us about Volker first, WorkBuzz. What's going on?
Sure. So as you say, I think the general dialogue topic within the HR community in the last 2 years is probably consistent across a lot of industries. You know, as you say, the Great Resignation, the response to lockdown, and how we address those work issues. So I guess our experience has been similar to most, but I think in our industry it's been particularly acute because it was an industry that was struggling a bit with retention and attraction anyway, and it's just been doubled down in the last couple of years. So we've got just short of 4,000 employees across the UK. We have seen some challenge in retention since you've come out of lockdown, and I think interestingly across all groups. So it's not one particular. It used to have pockets of this discipline is quite hard or in high demand for a period of time. Then what's been the real shift in the last couple of years, it seems across the board at all levels, all age groups, all disciplines. There just seems to be a scarcity of resource available, and that's partly because we're growing, the industry's doing well. HS2 has taken a lot of people, so there's those sort of dynamics in the industry that are starting to bite. But as a country, as a nation, as HR professionals, we've had to deal with a period of time that no one's had to deal with before, and it's been different for everyone. We've had to sort of adapt and learn on the go, really. I think regarding attraction and retention, our sort of approach has been, let's tell real stories. So when we're trying to attract and bring people on board, you can get a bit sort of cliched sometimes in recruitment, and actually we spend a lot of time actually telling people what it's really like here. And I think that's what comes later, but where it comes into engagement is that you can sell those stories and tell people. But if people don't feel that when they arrive, then your engagement suffers. And I think that's where engagement's been quite an effective tool, measuring, are we getting the messages right when we go out to market?
Thanks, Paul. So what I'm hearing is actually you are seeing increasing challenges around attracting and retaining people. There may well be shortages in areas for construction that weren't traditionally areas of shortages. And I also heard you say it's kind of all HS2's fault, really. So Lisa, being facetious. No, Lisa, so there is a challenge, isn't it? Because HS2, as you said, the largest construction project the UK's seen, it's created 30,000 jobs in a tiered supply chain that is now all up and running, and that's basically all come into the marketplace over the last 4 or 5 years. So that's a tremendous workforce challenge to assemble that team, and obviously there was a certain amount of capacity in the UK marketplace before COVID, before Brexit, before whatever. So what are you seeing at HS2 as those workforce issues and challenges that you're having to confront? Are they different to the ones that Paul's described, or some more challenging than others? What's your perspective?
Yeah, I think it's much the same. We have got obviously it's a hot employment market. We are facing those same struggles with attracting and retaining talent, and we're using the engagement feedback, the employee voice to sort of make some key changes. We're really trying to kind of sort of promote our brand. We've recently pulled together an EVP model, an employee value proposition model, where we're sort of focusing on what we do have to offer at HS2 in terms of people feeling cared for, empowered, connected, having some purpose. And of course, anybody that works on the HS2 project wants to leave a legacy. So we've been sort of really focusing our energies around that to really try and attract and retain. And of course, we've got the issues around skill shortages and, you know, whether we should say this or not, but ageing workforce. We've got to start thinking about really enticing our younger generations and underrepresented groups into our organisation. So we're working with our skills employment education teams to really sort of deliver several different programmes across HS2 to really aim to sort of develop those skills and entice the younger generations and those various groups amongst the communities that we impact. So there's a lot of work going on around that. We have also recruited over 1,000 apprentices. You may have seen that, and we're also what's called a gold member of the 5% Club. So this is in relation to our graduate and apprenticeship programmes. So we do actually retain sort of 5% of our grads and apprentices. So they're successful in gaining a permanent role. So there's a lot of work around that, and that's all good demonstration of engagement and a positive EVP. So I think it's similar to most organisations at the moment, but it's trying to be as innovative and creative as possible to try and bring. I think, you know, Paul said it's about bringing stories to life and making it real.
So I'm hearing some common themes between you. I mean, the one is about making sure that the organisation is represented to potential hires and future hires as it actually is, so that, you know, there's a kind of real experience telling the stories, I think, is what Paul described that as. So obviously that's quite important. And I also heard both of you talk a little bit about the fact that actually just appealing to the same audiences is no longer enough. You have to appeal to new audiences, whether that's direct entry talent programs or like at graduates or apprentices, or whether it's workless job starts or whatever. So I'm quite interested in the fact that what you've both described is the sort of beginnings of a sort of workforce strategy that's different, having to promote and sell yourselves differently to attract different audiences to having jobs and careers with you and in construction. And if that is true, I guess I'm curious, and the audience will be curious, as how do you know what to do and how to do it? So yeah, I guess it's in this context that your approach to kind of employee engagement, employee listening, employee voice might be giving you the right insights to do things with or to act upon. So what are you doing and why? Lisa, why don't you talk to us about the employee engagement approach at HS2 a little bit more, and then I'll come back to Paul and see if there are similarities or differences.
Yeah, so what we do at HS2 is we run biannual baseline engagement surveys. So by way of tracking and monitoring this, we have action plans in place. So based on those action plans, we then sort of introduce the you said we did approach. So we run those action plans. We look at we monitor them. We look at then what our directorates, our business areas are focusing their energies on, and those are what we sort of work with WorkBuzz on. We look at highlighting what are those areas of focus, what's going to really impact your engagement the most. So we run biannual surveys. We also run pulse surveys. So that really is a check-in to see sort of measuring how well we're doing against those areas of focus. And what we also do is run bespoke surveys depending on what the business needs is at the time. So an example would be hybrid working, employee wellbeing, health and safety, or it might be just a particular business area that wants us to focus more around their engagement levels. if they've got a particular different setup, for example. I've mentioned the fact that we've implemented an employee value proposition model recently, which focuses on some success factors. So what we've done is we've used those success factors to align that to our question set. So we've worked with WorkBuzz to ensure that all of those success factors are aligned to the questions, as well as the say, stay, strive questions. And then also what is our business focus, and also what's going to have the biggest impact on engagement. So that's what really we use when we're talking about engagement surveys. Yeah, so that's kind of where we're at the moment.
Just a sort of a corollary or follow-up, I'm just curious about the pulse surveys, because obviously those can be more set and more focused on particular issues or concerns. So what sort of topics, welfare, health and well-being, do you think about, particularly the onboarding process and whether people are experiencing the organisation as you promised it, or do you think about levers and exits to find out what may have gone wrong, or what you might do differently next time? Is there anything like that in the pulse approach? Or
yeah, so you've just took the words out of my mouth, Neil, actually, because that was what I was going to say next. So what we're doing at the moment is we're looking at implementing the onboarding and exit platform. So we're working with WorkBuzz now to start implementing that. So it really is having that full sense of employee experience from hire to retire. So we've got that sort of in-flight pulse surveys, which do focus on business needs. So that might be around leadership, it might be around well-being, whatever is, particularly for HS2, we've been doing a lot of work around goals and missions. So it might focus our energies around that. But what we're looking at now for this year is introducing that onboarding and exit interview survey platform, which then gives us that full holistic view really of the employee experience from hire to retire, which we're really excited about.
Thank you. Perfect. Paul, what's your approach at VolkerWessels to employee engagement? What are you doing, and why? Are you doing similar things to the way Lisa's described it, or are there things that are different that you'd like to draw out? And perhaps one other thing that people at home might be thinking about here is actually, I mean, one of the things that HR like is getting lots of insights and things that they can sort of work out what to do as a result of those insights. But ultimately, it always ends up as a line management issue and challenge, doesn't it? So perhaps something about how you get line managers involved and fully supportive of the work would be an interesting topic to explore with you as well.
Yeah, sure. So regarding this overall engagement approach, we're on annual surveys at present. So we did do one a year. We did do some bespoke surveys, you know, as we went into lockdown things, but generally we're on an annual survey cycle. Just touching on, Lisa said, and where it's evolved over the last couple of years in our engagement work is looking at that life cycle and the different groups of employees. I think traditionally you looked at headline figures and you looked at the maybe business areas that where it needs to be, and that was the extent of it. Whereas I think we're much more sophisticated now and looking at the data and what the data is telling us, because you know we haven't got a sort of holistic workforce, and you know, there are quite significant differences, and particularly given what's gone on in the last couple of years, we've looked quite closely at what's the engagement for people that joined us when we were in those lockdown phases. So it's a very different engagement, your recruitment hiring experience when they didn't meet colleagues for 6 months, whatever it may have been. So what impact has that had 18 months, 2 years down the line to their engagement to the business, and you know how we onboarded people? So that's been quite revealing, and it's given us some some good food for thought about how to work with those audiences and to make sure that they do feel fully integrated with the business, because there's definitely a slight difference in engagement in that group. I think regarding the how we engage with the business, and it kind of comes down to the analysis of the data with the people challenges we've spoken about, with all the different I suppose experiences we've been going through, as we talked about earlier. The people challenge undoubtedly has become higher profile and a much bigger topic for debate at board level and with senior business leaders. And what I found is that, usefully, I suppose, what that means is that they are now acquiring more data. So as a team, they're used to data on finances and programs and safety. And that's now been expected of HR and our people data as well. And that's where WorkBuzz have worked very closely with us to help produce that data that's useful to the business leaders. And that's where some of that more focused analysis has been good. So what we do is we have briefing sessions with the SMTs for each business area. So it's not bring HR leaders into a room, tell them the results, and then go and cascade. We actually have WorkBuzz talking directly with our business teams. And that does help with the engagement and help the buy-in. Obviously, it's still, I suppose, led by an HR team, as in what we do next. And as Lisa said, the sort of the classic, you said we did approach works well, and we make sure that it does focus people's minds on actually doing something and delivering some action, so we can say, look what we've done. I think the other factor with the WorkBuzz reports that we get, so we've got the sort of high level with the business leaders, this is what your business generally is telling you. We then actually get the reports out at the manager level, and it's not always focusing on the negative. When people are doing very well, what are they doing well, and how can we replicate that? So it is a reminder of looking at teams that are doing a very good job with engagement and how's that working. And then having our HR teams working with us, bespoke reports going down to team, maybe sort of 10, 15 people, and actually sharing those insights and results with them, we're finding quite useful as well. I think because every manager has dealt with the Great Resignation in the last 18 months, every manager wants to know what they can do to just give a bit of relief, really, and to improve engagement. So there's generally more buy-in, I think, from managers. And I think where we've got to now with the data that's being produced, we can give people those individual reports by their teams.
Perhaps just as a curiosity, because actually the expectation on the provision of information and data is that obviously it is used, as you've both said, but have you had to work harder or put more investment and time in with line managers to make them more aware of the fact that actually there's kind of an obligation and duty to respond? Have you had to put the extra effort into training and guiding them on how to respond, or have they willingly embraced the sort of different approach and data-led insights that both of you are clearly providing them with?
I would say overall, actually, we've been, as HR team, trying to keep up. I don't think we're dragging people to understand data, and because of what's been going on and so the people challenges, focusing attention that we're all going through. I actually think it's been demand led. That we want information, we want to know what we can do, and we've had to adapt our support to meet the requirements. That'd be my experience. Great.
Lisa, similar or different?
Yeah, I think what we've done differently with our most recent survey is we've had WorkBuzz deliver the results. So they've delivered the results to our exec. They've then delivered the results to our directorates, which is our senior leaders and managers and all staff. And that's had a significant difference and impact on the way that engagement is perceived. It's now taken, it feels like it's taken more seriously. And I think that's because we've had a people science expert in front of them, giving them some real insight. They've seen this as a real expert in the industry, and they've really listened. So we've actually been asked more in the last quarter about more insights, more data than we've ever been asked before, because they're really interested, they're intrigued, they want more information. So it's been fantastic to see that turnaround, and that was purely having WorkBuzz co-delivering the results with us. It's made such a difference.
Perfect, and that's something that you've both touched upon as being of interest and importance, and actually, of course, we've all seen it in other areas as well, haven't we? Sometimes just having the third party expert voice does enable people to take it just that little bit more seriously, and actually a third party voice can sometimes be just a little bit more challenging of people's desire to look at the data in a way that suits them rather than actually what the data says. So I think that's a useful insight around how the people science team at WorkBuzz can add some value to the understanding, interpretation and planning for use of data. I'm going to drill in a little bit into the insights that you've both got in just a second, but perhaps just at this point, just to check with Hayley, are there any observations, comments or questions that we can draw to the panel's attention?
There are actually. We've had a question from Rachel Raven, who's asked quite a pertinent question that we're getting across a lot of our industries at the moment. You guys must have a huge proportion of remote workers or deskless workers. How are you engaging them in the whole employee engagement side of things? Are you using different ways of engaging with your deskless workers, or are you treating them the same as all of your workforce?
That's a great question. Paul, would you like to have a stab at that first?
Sure. Well, we're asking the same questions, so I suppose we are treating them the same in that regard. So it's not a different survey, different measure of engagement. It's exactly the same. Regarding how we get them to participate, to me, it's around making sure we have the time, we get the messaging right. So our internal communications is critical. And using different methods to get that message across, because they don't access necessarily more traditional emails and things. So how do they know it's happening? But yeah, it wasn't that long ago where I worked in businesses where you send paper copies out, expect them to fill out a paper form, send it back to us, and you get a return rate of 5% if you're lucky. What we do at WorkBuzz is actually make the time, give incentive to be at the office, get together. Give them the equipment, give them the space to complete the survey. So it's not onerous. It's on us to make it as easy as possible, and it has worked. I mean, I wouldn't pretend that the participation for sort of in the field operatives is as high as a desk-bound head office staff, but it's still very good, and the engagement actually reflects that. The engagement is probably 20 points higher than I've seen in similar businesses I've worked. So it's really vital that we make the time and the effort and focus on different audiences. And obviously that was the particular question around the audience, but I think it applies across engagement generally, that we just need to make sure that whatever audiences you're trying to work with and get information from, you suit their style and what works for them. But it is working here at the moment, just giving them a bit of space, a bit of time, a dedicated time to do that, and explain. And I suppose the critical part, just to finish that off, is actually making sure they understand why we're doing it and they get the results at the end as well. So it's not just about results going out with an email from our chief exec. There are more direct communications to those teams, so they know what's being said as well, and they get the same feedback on the results that everybody else does.
Lisa, any observations on the deskless worker challenge?
Yeah, so we're actually in discussions with our supply chain at the moment around exactly that. So what's the best way of approaching it? Because of course we send out our surveys to our core HS2 staff, but the majority of our employees work within our supply chain. So it is what is the best way of doing it? Is it a kiosk through the mobile phones? And we are in the beginning stages of having those discussions. So we know that WorkBuzz can sort of offer both of those solutions. It's just really what is the best sort of solution for each of the supply chain, because obviously they're all very different organisations.
Thank you. So I kind of from a chair's perspective of this conversation, I mean, it's worth having a conversation with WorkBuzz around what their technology is capable of doing, because they're heading towards the world in which mobile communications are available, and most people, wherever they're working, do have a mobile phone. Therefore, everyone can be accessed. So it's worth talking to WorkBuzz about that. I think the learned experience of putting time aside and ensuring that employees on construction sites are treated the same and encouraged and communicated with in order to have the same treatment and be able to finish surveys. I think that's absolutely the right approach, and I've seen that in other distributed industries as well. I think another great example would be the Openreach business in the BT world, where all of their workers in effect are out in the field, and they handle it in the way that Lisa and Paul have described. Hayley, time for one other observation or comment before we move on with the questions that I had. What else is there? Anything else?
There's no other questions in at the moment, but it is worth noting that actually WorkBuzz are holding a dedicated deskless employees webinar on the 6th of March. So we'll reach out to everybody who's participated today and give you the registration link for that if that's something you're specifically interested in following up.
Perfect, absolutely on trend, and that's obviously a good one for everyone's diaries. Let's get back to these case studies then. So my next question is perhaps just to drill in, and if you wouldn't mind sort of sharing what insights your surveys have given you, perhaps with reference to some of the data. And then I'm sure the audience listening is curious as to what did you then do about these insights? So bring it to life. Everyone, you've described how you go about doing it, which is all frequency. You've described the size and scale of some of the challenges, but tell us about what you've learned and what you've done. Give us an example. Paul, would you like to go first?
Yeah, sure. As I touched on earlier, we particular focus of it on survey the complete end of last year, what the experience of the people who have joined us during either sort of lockdown or hybrid working, not a standard onboarding process. And there was definitely a trend, I guess, for people that have been with us for sort of 1 to 2 years, with a bit of a dip in that second year. So we look quite closely on that, the whole onboarding process and our transition, back into physical work rather than working hybrid remotely. We've looked at our onboarding process, which was really focused in that first sort of upfront piece in the first 3 months, and then sort of a nice sort of honeymoon period. But what commitments were we making at that time, and were we delivering on those 9 months, 12 months into employment, and in particular things around commitments made at offer stage, personal growth opportunities, that recognition, and all things that maybe you just had to do in a slightly different way because we were working in a different manner. And so how do we implement those? How do we look at that growth? How do we understand what people are looking for? How do we recognise performance in an unusual world? And how does that, I suppose, adapt? Now we're sort of heading back to more sort of face-to-face working. So that's been a real focus for us, and making sure we have that sharing the information we do have and the solutions we have. We've implemented a refreshed and much improved career pathway program, and making sure those messages are getting out there so people have joined us to understand where that personal growth comes from. We've looked at rewards, introduced rewards platform, so and make sure people understand the benefits they receive and the recognition. So there's been a number of relatively large projects we've undertaken towards the end of last year and beginning of this year that were directly related to or really linked to the engagement feedback we're receiving, and where people felt that maybe we were not quite delivering. I mean, put that into context, the engagement within the business is very high. It's the highest in the organisation I've ever worked for. So and the response rate is very high. So we do overall have a positive.
Just share those numbers with us if you would.
Yes, so the engagement's over 80% in the business. We tend the response rates are about 3/4 of our workforce. And given the nature of workforce, that's much higher than I've seen historically in sort of similar businesses. So we're not struggling with overall engagement challenges as such. But there are pockets and there are areas where actually maybe certain groups, are maybe not as engaged as others. And I think that's where, touching back to the people science element and the insights that WorkBuzz provide, and the level of detail and the ability to analyse different groups has been much improved in the last 2 to 3 years. And that's allowed us to focus on those areas and put these responses in place.
Thank you. Lisa, similar, share some of the data insights, perhaps give us some of the numbers that you've got, and then what's that encouraging you to do about the insights you've got, and why those particular areas of focus.
Yeah, I mean, we've done a lot. We've responded a lot to the insights and the feedback that we've had over the last few years. Probably put in a lot of emphasis around well-being. Particularly when we went into lockdown. So there was a lot of wellbeing initiatives. Even our CEO introduced a My Time hour for everyone, and there was huge focus around that. But as we've sort of time gone by with more engagement focused surveys, predominantly looking at leadership. In terms of if we think about the most recent survey, which was October last year, we had a response rate of 83% and our engagement score was 73%. So still very good responses and engagement scores. But thinking about our key areas of focus was really around hybrid working. It was around line managers and leadership. So those were our 3 key areas of focus. So as a result of that and those insights, we've focused our energies on introducing a new hybrid working policy, a new sort of model, if you like. So we're now introduced at the beginning of this month a new model which is now suggesting that our employees come into the office twice a week, or site twice a week, and remote working 3 times. Because what's really important when you're looking at your data is that you're looking at both quantitative and qualitative data, because it can tell you quite a different story. And when you look at the face of it, it looks like it's giving you a real positive story, and you take a deeper dive into the free text, and actually it's giving you some quite different insight, which has been really key for us in decisions and really those actions going forward. So the hybrid working, what the messages were is that people felt confused. They didn't understand really what they were meant to do. Were they coming in twice a week? Were they coming in 3 times a week? So they felt really confused by it. So that's why we've been very clear now about what that model looks like. And so far it's been well received. There's been a lot of focus around line manager capacity and capability. So we've introduced we're revising all of our line manager training modules, our leadership and management discovery programs. So we're kind of giving them a bit of energy based on the feedback that we've received in the survey. And leadership was also a key area of focus for us. So we at HS2 we run values award weeks, which was also introduced as part of the survey feedback in 2020. And we have 4 values at HS2, and we have a values week per quarter. And so what we decided in January in response to the survey is run a series of leadership events. And those events are focused around diversity in leadership. We had empowerment was an area of focus. So we ran a session around empowering our people, empowering yourself. And we also ran some sessions around the hybrid working model and how to manage that. And also we ran an engagement session. We got an external consultant in to run a session around the importance of engaging your team. So we really listened to the feedback, and all of those sessions that we ran in January had tremendous feedback and the highest attendance that we've had so far. So we really sort of listened and responded. I think what also has been quite interesting is some of the life events and the feedback that we've had through that. So we've looked at introducing a menopause policy and also a pregnancy and child loss policy. So there's and I think I mentioned earlier is that we've also introduced this employee value proposition model as well, which really does sort of focus on those sort of key areas that the reasons why people stay or are attracted to HS2. So there's lots going on, and I think where we're at right now is we've decided to look at implementing a line manager employee engagement toolkit. So this is really about ensuring there's a consistent approach from our managers about how they engage with the teams, and really understanding how effective employee engagement can support business performance diagnostics as well. So really helping our managers understand how can they reduce sickness absence, increase performance and reduce turnover. So that's really our focus at the moment. So hopefully that's helped.
Thank you. Look, and that's really really quite some interesting insights. I picked up on a couple of things as I was listening. I think the first thing is you really have to look beyond the headline data and drill into the detail, because actually you'll probably find that there are different actions that will have different impacts in different parts of the organization. And that sounds like it should be obvious, but actually sometimes it isn't, and it kind of mitigates against a group-wide or organization-wide approach. Sometimes things are much more effectively done at the level of, say, a frontline supervisor or in a team where it's a much more direct, short-acting communication. So I think that's one thing I heard. I think the other thing I'm hearing from you both slightly is actually sometimes some things are just more important than others. So it's always nice, isn't it, to imagine that every function in an organization is somehow equal. But if I take HS2 as an example, since the core function is to design, let and manage contracts, I guess if the commercial and procurement functions aren't singing, that represents a bigger risk for HS2 at the HS2 limited level than perhaps, for example, if the HR department wasn't singing to the same level. So sometimes some functions need a bit more love and care and attention, and the data has to be used, and that might have more impact than more broadly across the organization. So I can see some questions coming in now. So let me just go back to those questions. There's a great one here about how do we maintain engagement with a lot of our people still working at home? How do we reinforce our strong culture to newcomers in these circumstances? So maintaining it with lots of people still working remotely and newcomers. Any thoughts about that? Paul first.
As I touched on earlier, that was something that certainly was coming up our survey, that people that have been with us maybe a year, 18 months, engagement was probably at a different level to other groups. And the reality is we are majority back at work now, so we came back fairly early. Obviously a lot of our operations didn't stop, they're always out on site, so we don't really have a significant home working culture. All of our employees are back at least 3 days a week. Having said that, it's still a different environment. Not working face to face in the same way. It's different, and it comes down to, I suppose, supporting line managers and helping them understand how to manage people remotely. It's around communication, and we've had a significant focus on our internal communication in the last 12 months or so. It's just it's become more and more important, because it's not grabbing everyone together for 5 minutes in the office and giving them a quick update, because maybe not everyone's there at the same time. So it's just learning different ways, I think, to engage with people and having consistent messaging. But I wouldn't say we're struggling with a totally remote workforce environment. That's not really how we operate at WorkBuzz.
Thanks, Paul. I'll ask the next question and get Lisa to answer it first. I mean, I don't think you do this at HS2, and I don't think Paul does, but the question from Rachel is it unreasonable to make engagement surveys mandatory? What would your professional view on that be from your perspectives? Lisa?
Yeah, we don't make them mandatory. We send the survey out to everybody, of course, and we send reminders to those that don't complete it. But of course, we don't feel it is appropriate to make it mandatory. Everybody has their own choice as to whether they want to feedback or not. We can only encourage. Obviously, our view is that the more information, the more feedback we have as an organisation, the more influence and the more impact we can make and react to people's feedback and make a difference and make it improved based on their thoughts. But yeah, we wouldn't make it mandatory.
Paul, are you the same?
We are the same. I guess my first one to that is I think the response rates are quite a good sign of engagement overall anyway. So rather than making it mandatory, if people actually want to share their insights, the higher that number, then I think generally the higher engagement in the business. So I certainly don't see too much value in making them mandatory. I think that if if the challenge is getting feedback from more people, it's making sure that the survey is relevant. So making sure that we do communicate the results, we do communicate the actions. People see that by putting the time and effort into completing the survey, something good will come out of it. So personally, I would advocate increasing the response rate by making it relevant and making people want to do it rather than forcing them to. And I think once you start forcing people, are you getting genuine responses? There'll be lots of not unusual just tick boxes just because they have to do it. Now, providing incentives to people is an option, but I certainly would go down the mandatory route.
Thank you. I think from a kind of WorkBuzz perspective, there's a wide range of companies that WorkBuzz supports, and obviously there's all sizes and shapes there, and to be honest with you, all sorts of levels of response rate. But I think, Paul, your comment about the response rate itself being indicative of a certain level of connection with leadership and direction of travel of the business is true, and that one of the best ways to change that is to design the survey by using employee focus groups to help you get to the kernel of the issues that they want to have discussed, and then actually communicate slightly differently, probably using employee representatives as a way of engaging rather than it simply being a kind of survey tool that's issued or something that comes from the CEO. So I think you have to think creatively and differently, but in your two organisations, quite high response rates, and I guess you're also seeing the fact those response rates really depend upon management doing something about what's been said, or else people do get disillusioned and do switch off gradually, don't they, if they think it's not, the feedback's not going to any value. So let's just sort of from my perspective, finish on this ROI point, and then we'll just perhaps see if there's time for one last question from the audience. But I think you've touched upon the fact that things have changed in your organisation as a result of the feedback you've been gathering. But are you actually seeing a return on investment? You spend a certain amount of time and effort running surveys. They cost you a certain amount to have WorkBuzz do what they do. What's the impact? What impact is that having on a business? How do you justify it? If you were not as embedded doing this, how would you be describing the benefits this is giving you? Lisa first, perhaps.
Yeah, I think we've identified a positive correlation between higher level of engagement and reduced absenteeism. So that's really a sort of a strong message that we then share with our senior leadership, because obviously engagement surveys enable us as a business to look at evidence-based business performance diagnostics. So it really helps us to define and shape different management interventions. So I think that's probably the only correlation that we've found at the moment. We're obviously doing a lot more work with WorkBuzz and our own internal MI team to look and take a deeper dive into our other sort of our teams, our departments, to see whether there's any other further correlation. But I think we've definitely seen an improvement in absenteeism where you've got high engagement. But
you are putting the kind of normal HRMI side by side with the engagement data and looking to cross-refer as to what to try and work out what's going on and whether an impact is being had one way or the other. So that's a good message. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Paul, is it similar for yourself? What does the return on investment argument look like inside your company?
Well, my first point is that the people sciences team at WorkBuzz will do lots of graphs on correlations of engagement against other measures. So they would certainly support there is a link and a return on investment. So that's something to explore if that's of particular relevance. But I think as a business, I think engagements are. We don't sell our engagement surveys. We've done this. This is the output. These websites. Look what's changed. It's not quite that sort of direct link we make. I see return on investment engagement is enabling us to make much better informed decisions, develop much better informed policies. So, I touched on earlier, personal growth is one of those areas that we have a strong L&D function. We invest a lot in L&D, and personal growth is always sort of the lower end of our engagement sort of scores. And why is that? And so the more we can understand why through the engagement survey, we've now sort of focused on developing some career pathways with some some very sort of real visibility of how we see careers progressing, the different levels, what options are available to people, because the sense was that maybe people didn't have that visibility that we maybe thought was there. So yeah, I think that's why we see the return on investment, that it gives us the data and information to make good decisions. We don't set it internally as we spent X amount on WorkBuzz and this is our return on it. It's just seen as a invaluable business tool to help us run the business better, really.
Thank you. And that's something that I think I hear from lots of different organisations. However, I do know that for those of you who may be at the start of an employee engagement journey and you're looking for the arguments that you might make to your board or your management teams around why introduce employee engagement, why run pulse surveys, why take a whole end-to-end approach to employee listening, I do know that WorkBuzz have developed case studies. I do know they have the ROI calculations and examples that they can share with you. And I do think there's a place for those things, perhaps with the more sceptical leaders. But Paul, I think you're right. There's something about hearts and minds and a belief that actually we should be listening to what our people think that sits at the heart of a really great and strong culture. And I know that's also been HS2's approach. But if you need to go down the hard data line way of doing things, I'm sure WorkBuzz can also help you. There's a couple of small questions that we've not come back to. The first one from Jane again is, what are your views on the 4-day week? Now, this is an interesting one. There's been an experiment, hasn't there? You may have read it in the papers about a number of companies basically changing their work practices for a pilot so that all their employees just worked employment contracts and worked 4 days a week, not 5 or more with overtime. And some of those companies have said they've seen productivity, performance enhancements, and they're going to continue with the 4-day week as the permanent solution. So I don't think it's something that either of you are doing at the moment, but you may be. What are your views? What would your thoughts be on that?
It's an interesting challenge in our industry. I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but we do tend to be fairly traditional. I think that would have to come, I think, from a whole industry shift. Programs, expectations, critical infrastructure, how do we support that? So it's certainly not something that I would say is a live discussion with us at the moment.
Thank you. Is it the same at HS2, Lisa?
Yeah, it is. I mean, we offer flexible working. We have a process that we go through that we introduced last year, which is working very well. So that enables people to look at compressed hours or, going part-time hours. It just enables us, as long as there is, we can work around the business requirements, then we look at those case by case.
And I think that's probably a helpful insight on that point. The 4-day week, what would my view be, since I put the others on the spot? I can see that it will work in some circumstances, but I'm not sure adopting a one-size-fits-all for any workforce is the right approach. I think actually the world of work needs to be adapted to what individuals want and can do. So you have to start off with working out how flexible you can be in allowing people to operate different patterns. And then you have to work out how flexible you can be around where you need that work to be conducted. And if you have a solution that has a range of options that can be tailored, you've got more chance of appealing to a broader segment of the community to come and work within and be part of your workforce. And it might just give you an edge over companies that are being more rigid or perhaps a little bit more old-fashioned or backwards looking in their outlook. And that's something that I've certainly experienced with younger workers coming into the workforce now around their expectations. And it's something we should all be concerned about in terms of ensuring that we attract and keep those parts of the workforce that traditionally disappeared, particularly female employees in their 20s and 30s. Why not work harder to get them continuing to be involved in the world of work in any way that they can and should do? I think it's a great initiative. We've got time for one final closing remark from each of you. Any final thoughts or tips for our listeners? The one piece of advice you would like to share on employee engagement with them? Putting you on the spot, quick fire, rapid response required. Paul first.
I think, as we touched on already, take time to work out what the data is actually telling you and put that effort in. And the one thing I would say is don't forget to celebrate what you do well. There's a real tendency to always look at, you know, where we're not quite doing things right, but there's lots of things where the feedback is really positive, and actually people like to know that we are doing things well, and they share that. So don't forget to celebrate.
Great. Lisa?
Yeah, mine was about really looking at ensuring you're looking at that qualitative and quantitative data. Don't just take one or the other, and also ensure you respond to it. High engagement comes from when you actually respond to survey feedback. So be seen to actually react and respond to the survey feedback is my advice.
Thank you. I'd like to thank you, Lisa, and you, Paul, for your contributions today and your insights. It's been tremendously helpful. I'd like to thank Hayley for facilitating and administering this call and for setting it up in the first place. And I'd like to thank all of you for joining us today and listening and contributing your questions. It's been a privilege to chair and be involved in your conversations. Perhaps my last remark to you all would be, WorkBuzz have plenty of insights that will enable you to understand how you could be doing something different with your employee listening strategies. They can connect you with lots of organizations that are confronting some of the issues and problems that you have. Reach out to them and see if they can help you. And if I personally can help you with anything to do with employee listening, employee engagement, from my own experience and contacts, I'd be delighted to do so. So don't hesitate to get in contact with me as well. So bang on 11, we'll close. Thank you so much for your time and attention today, and good luck with the rest of it, everybody. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thanks, man. Thanks, Sally.
Thank you both.